On today's show, Jalen Green getting bigger and stronger, Alperen Sengun getting taller, plus all the latest Rockets news, trade rumors, and intel on what we can expect in the coming days and weeks throughout the NBA draft and free agency. Some of the expectations for how the Rockets are going to handle some of the targets that they're pursuing in free agency. A quick update on the assistant coaching staff for your Houston Rockets. All that and much more coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start.
The Houston Rockets select Jalen Green, Alperen Sengun, and Jabari Smith Jr.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal.
Every time I step on that floor, I'm coming.
Hey, Houston fans, I am so happy.
You're getting somebody who's going to come in with a chip on their shoulder, somebody who's going to come in and compete from day one.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays. Be sure to follow along on Twitter at JT Gatlin, and the show, of course, at Locked On Rockets, free and available wherever you listen to your podcasts, including YouTube. Go to YouTube, search Locked On Rockets. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. That's prizepicks.com. Promo code LOCKEDON. And as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on the way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you for making LOR part of your day. Shout out to all the everydayers every single day. Man, a lot to get to today on today's show. We've got Jalen getting bigger and stronger. We've got Alperen Sengun getting taller, apparently, which are both good signs moving forward for those two kind of centerpieces of the Rockets rebuild, as well as some other, news and notes concerning the Rockets. The rumor mill is churning at incredibly high-octane speeds this time of year, so we're going to sift through some of that, as well as some of the latest intel on what to kind of expect from the Rockets moving forward through the NBA draft and free agency. Let's start with Jalen and Sengun, though, because we know that Sengun got taller, apparently, courtesy of Tari Eason, who went on Twitter talking about the fact that Sengun is tall ASF now. And it actually got turned into a bit of a meme inside NBA circles, because then other Twitter accounts and everybody on NBA Twitter started sharing their own posts about different random players saying, oh, so-and-so said so-and-so got so much taller now. He's tallest, ASF now, all that stuff. And it became a big running joke. But apparently it was a real thing. Apparently all the guys were clamoring about it. They were all super excited about it. They wanted to measure Alp. They were, freaking out about him being so tall. And so I think it is legit that Alp apparently grew. And it's also worth noting that when Alp was originally listed, his height, for whatever reason, his height was originally listed way lower than he actually is for whatever reason, just lost in translation or whatever. He got listed at 6'9" when he's actually about 6'10", 6'10 and a half without shoes on. So with shoes on, he looks a little bit considerably taller than that. And then if he grew on top of that, that's an added bonus to that. So Alp getting taller is, I think, a pretty big deal, because if you're going to have a center who is a bit, I'm going to put it lightly, a defensive liability, and you're going to be forced to play certain schemes or try to cover for him at times, you can get away with it to an extent if you're bigger and stronger than the other team, right? You look at the Denver Nuggets as the model for doing that. Their front court was just bigger and stronger than every other front court that they went against, with Aaron Gordon, Michael Porter Jr., and Nikola Jokic. Now, does that mean Alperen Sengun's growth spurt puts him at the same, height as Jokic? Is he going to be as big and strong as Jokic one day? Probably not, but the closer that he can get to that level, even if he grows, another inch or two or whatever, if he actually tops out at about 7 feet tall, that makes a distinct difference versus being 6'9", 6'10", and, giving them a bit more of that size advantage. It really does. Every inch counts. Pause. Damn it. I knew I had it. I wasn't going to say it, and then I decided to say it anyways. But seriously, fighting for rebounds, loose balls, all that stuff, it all matters for Alperen Sengun. So the height thing is really interesting and an encouraging sign, the fact that all the guys were so excited about it. And then Jalen Green is apparently pushing close to 200 pounds now, adding quite a bit of muscle. He's come a very long way from where he was his rookie season. You see the workout photos of him with Josh Christopher and working out with the other Rockets guys, and he looks bigger. Like, there's a photo of him and Josh Christopher standing side by side, and he looks like Josh came into the league pretty big and strong and continued to get stronger, and he looks pretty big next to Josh. So either Josh is like slimming down a little bit, possibly, which is still a possibility, but just like the perspective in that photo makes you think, wow, Jalen's actually getting pretty strong. And that's been one of the biggest things for Jalen as he's gone through this first 2 years of his NBA career is, he's had this kind of like wiry frame. There's been points where defenders have been able to like knock him off his balance and, really kind of manhandle him at times. And especially through the last like half of this past season, it really felt like he started to understand how to use both his explosiveness, but also just his body, right? Absorbing contact and finishing hard through contact and getting to the rim and getting to the free throw line and all that stuff. Getting bigger and stronger will only further unlock that side of Jalen's game. And as he continues to get bigger and stronger, assuming he still maintains the same level of explosiveness, the same first step, the lightning quick speed, being able to turn on the jets, all of that, he's going to become unguardable at some point because his only knock on him at this point when defenders were trying to slow him down was if you had a bigger, stronger defender that could kind of keep up with Jalen, it could cause him some problems, right? Now, if he's going to be able to body up to some of those guys, then it's going to make a world of difference. It's also going to help him defensively because there are a number of times that you see Jalen trying to check somebody on the defensive end, and he's doing all the right things, right? He's in the right spot. He's bodying up. He's doing all that. And there are guys that can just power through him at this stage. So adding muscle is only going to help Jalen Green. Alperen Sengun getting taller is only going to help them. It's crazy when you think about it because, again, these are just like, they're still just kids, right? They're both so incredibly young, and their bodies are still like growing and developing, and neither of them are done at this point. They're not anywhere near being finished products. So it is really exciting to see what the future kind of holds for both of those guys moving forward, especially into this next season under new head coach Ime Udoka. Coming up, want to get into some of the other Rockets rumors, news, speculation, little things that I'm hearing heading into the NBA draft, as well as expectations for free agency. We're going to get to all of that and more coming up here in just one moment. But first, today's episode is brought to you by Ibotta. Look, we're always throwing money at something, right? Whether it's kids' school supplies, a new house project, whatever, the list goes on and on and on, right? It's time to stop spending your hard-earned money without getting anything in return. Enter Ibotta. You can earn cash back on every shopping trip that you go on. Ibotta gives you the cash back on hundreds of grocery items from produce to personal care to pantry goods. Just link your loyalty account or upload your receipt after you shop and get your cash back. It's that easy. Ibotta gives you real cash back, not points. Other apps give you points and don't amount to much. With Ibotta, you get real cash back that you can cash out to your bank account, PayPal, or even gift cards. You can earn cash back on hundreds of online brands as well, retailers, all of that, just using Ibotta. That includes Lowe's, Macy's, Sephora. It's all available to you. Right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 just for trying it by using code LOCKED when you register. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app and use code LOCKED. That's Ibotta, Ibotta, in the Google Play or App Store and use code LOCKED. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. We're going to get into some of the rumors and speculation surrounding the team right now because this is the time of the year where the rumor mill is churning at breakneck speed with all sorts of stuff coming out. But I want to share really quick. Apparently, as far as the Rockets assistant coaching search is going, we've got all the names that we've gone over here at the show before, the names that have been reported, announced. Aaron Miles was kind of TBD the last time we talked about this, and he still is currently TBD, but he's very much still in play for the Houston Rockets, apparently. Currently kind of, seeing what other offers are out there and kind of weighing them internally, but the Rockets do have a spot. They would very much like to have him. Ime would like to have him on the staff. Again, so much of it was about, wanting to reunite Ime Udoka with the staff that he had in Boston, because all those guys went to Boston for Ime. And so when Ime was gone, it made a lot of sense. They all they were like, no, we want to come work for you again. So Aaron Miles is kind of in that same boat, but also kind of seeing what's out there, seeing what other positions might become available. If there's maybe like a lead assistant position somewhere that he might be able to get, which would be a little bit different than maybe his role here with the Houston Rockets, seeing as how Ime Udoka kind of expects, he's talked about it before, having a staff where everybody kind of pulls their own weight, everybody does a little bit of everything, rather than having like one dedicated like lead assistant or like an offensive guy and a defensive guy and a development guy, that kind of stuff. So that's kind of what I'm hearing about that. So Aaron Miles could still be on the horizon for the Rockets. The other thing that I hadn't considered, and I've seen this rumor kind of floating around, and I've talked to a handful of different people about it, but we did that whole episode talking about Zion Williamson, right? And the Rockets potentially trading for him, trying to, acquire him, all that stuff. One rumor that I've seen with a little bit of juice behind it and could be a distinct draft night possibility is the idea that the Rockets potentially trade up to picks 2 or 3, depending on where Scoot Henderson lands, and use that as the trade package to go get Zion Williamson rather than just pick 4. Because the Pelicans want Scoot Henderson. They want Scoot Henderson very, very badly. And I know that internally the Rockets are incredibly high on Zion Williamson and what he can be when he is healthy. And again, they're definitely kicking the tires on what that would potentially look like. So I've seen the rumor kind of float around the idea of, if the Rockets are able to put themselves in position to take Scoot Henderson themselves, so again, that would be trading up to pick number 2 or trading up to pick number 3 if why am I blanking? I almost called them the Bobcats for some reason. If the Hornets don't take Scoot Henderson themselves, then that still throws in a bit of a question mark there at pick number 4. And again, there's still that very slight possibility that Scoot Henderson ultimately falls to the Rockets at 4. And if he were to fall to the Rockets at 4, then that just kind of changes the whole calculus on whether or not you make a big draft night trade to try and swing for the fences to get Scoot Henderson to then flip him for Zion Williamson. I would personally hate that move because I'm, again, incredibly high. I'm firmly in the Scoot Henderson camp. I think the kid is the truth. I think he's going to have a very long and successful NBA career. But again, if the Pelicans really want Scoot, and if the Rockets are really interested in the idea of a healthy Zion Williamson, who is, again, a very, very high caliber player when he is healthy, and he can be easily the best player on a championship caliber team, pending health, all the other question marks that are surrounding him, right? Then that's a possibility. That's something that is not, it's not just conjecture. It's not just hypotheticals. It's something that could very legitimately happen, is seeing the Rockets make a move to try and trade up to then get Scoot Henderson themselves so that they can then just trade directly with the Pelicans, because it has to make sense for the receiving team, the Hornets or the Blazers. And while the Pelicans might be really high on Scoot Henderson and wanting to trade and get him themselves, the return that the Pelicans can offer or are willing to offer might not be up to snuff for what the Hornets or the Blazers ultimately want, right? Both of those teams might be a little bit more risk averse when it comes to Zion, or both of those teams might want a guy like Brandon Ingram instead. And that might be the breaking point for the Pelicans, where they say, no, we'll put Zion on the table because he's hurt and he is currently kind of unserious about basketball, all the red flags, whatever, but we're not willing to put Brandon Ingram on the table. How much would the Rockets be willing to put on the table? Because you don't look at it from the perspective of, the Rockets are putting XYZ on the table to trade for Scoot Henderson. You look at it as they're putting XYZ on the table to trade for Scoot Henderson to then possibly trade for Zion Williamson. And Bill Simmons, our good friend Bill Simmons here at the Locked on Rockets podcast, good friend of all Rockets fans everywhere, was recently on his show saying that he firmly does not expect Zion to still be a member of the Pelicans come Thursday. So Bill Simmons, who is, credible, is still plugged in. I do when he drops something with that much conviction, there's usually some legitimate sourcing done behind the scenes behind it, even if it does come with some green tinted, clover tinted shades, as he is a known Celtics homer. But that's significant, right? So Zion very well could be on the way out in New Orleans. Now, is that a deal for the Rockets where he winds up in Rockets red, or is that just some completely other random trade? Do the Pelicans actually swing for the fence and land Scoot Henderson themselves, which would, break my heart because I want Scoot Henderson in Houston? Or is it just some completely random third option, right? Where maybe like the New York Knicks finally sweep in and they get their guy in Zion 4 years later and all that good stuff. There's a lot of different ways that this could all pan out. The Rockets have the 4th pick, and a lot of signs right now are pointing towards it's going to be Amen Thompson. He seems to be the best fit, the best option, easily the highest ceiling guy after the other 3 are potentially off the board in Wembanyama, Brandon Miller, and Scoot Henderson. So at that point, if you're the Rockets, you still want to take the highest, the biggest swing possible, if you will, even if Amen's not quite as ready to go as Scoot Henderson, right? You've got the size, you've got the insane athleticism, all that stuff. He is going to be the guy, I think, that the Rockets take with pick number 4, assuming they don't deal the pick and assuming the first 3 picks go the way that everybody is expecting them to kind of go at this point in time. Now, some other angles to consider for the Houston Rockets free agency outlook, some of the expectations for what names the Rockets are going to be pursuing and some of the reasons they might be pursuing those names and what some of the contracts actually might look like for these guys. We're going to get to that in just one moment. But first, today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. So what is Prize Picks? It's daily fantasy sports, but how does it work? Basically, you pick 2 to 6 players, and if they score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you can win up to 25 times back on your money on any entry that you submit. There's no competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections that they make available. Prize Picks offers projections on any sport that you watch. That's NBA, NFL, MLB, NHL, PGA. They've got you covered for all the action over at Prize Picks. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that simple. They're safe. They offer fast withdrawals. Currently operational in over 30 states and Canada. So download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. That means if you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. So don't forget to enter promo code LOCKEDON at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. And final segment here at Locked on Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Now, we're going to get into some of the free agency names and some of the expectations for how the Rockets are going to kind of handle the pursuit of some of these guys, because there's this expectation. Michael Scotto of USA Today reported that Ime Udoka is definitely wanting to add a veteran point guard presence to this Rockets roster. So regardless of what happens with the NBA draft, it does feel like the Rockets do want to have a veteran point guard on the roster, which kind of points to the idea of Kevin Porter Jr. shifting positions and no longer at least being locked into that point guard spot for the Rockets, which could mean him coming off the bench as the 6th man. It could mean him shifting over and playing the 3 spot. That's all kind of still up in the air. But when we look at some of the ways that the NBA landscape is currently shifting with the recent blockbuster trade, Bradley Beal being dealt from the Washington Wizards to the Phoenix Suns, forming a new big 3 there. Chris Paul is currently sitting in limbo because the trade is not officially complete yet. So the Wizards are trying to find a 3rd team to include as a trade partner to reroute Chris Paul to, but he is definitely on the way out. The Rockets could potentially be that trade partner, not in a 3-team trade, but if they held on to Chris Paul until after July 1st, then the Rockets could flip and Chris Paul could be absorbed into the Rockets' newfound cap space that they will have access to. But that doesn't become available until July 1st. So the Rockets cannot be the 3rd team in a potential trade for Chris Paul. So that could be a veteran point guard option, assuming, again, all things on the Rockets side are clear. Now, again, it's very dependent on whether or not Chris Paul would be open to the idea of a Rockets reunion, but that card is definitely on the table now for the Rockets to potentially toss their hat in the ring to say, hey, we'll take Chris Paul off your hands. Although right now the early signs are pointing to the LA Clippers and a reunion there. The Clippers have a bunch of expiring deals that they could send to the Washington Wizards and help them clean up their cap space situation, which was the exact goal of offloading the Bradley Beal contract. And another small note, the Rockets dealing that Wizards pick looks better and better now that they used to acquire Alperen Sengun, because that pick had crazy protections on it, and now the Wizards are looking like they're going to probably bottom out. So that pick would have just kept rolling over, and would have eventually turned into like 2 second-round picks. So they got good value for that pick when they dealt it to acquire Alperen Sengun. When we look at, and also the other note here, and we'll probably revisit this in a future episode, the idea of what's going to happen with Kristaps Porzingis, right? Like, if he plans to opt into his contract, are they willing to potentially trade him? Could he be a target for the Rockets to explore? We've discussed that here before as a off-the-cuff possibility for the Rockets. It could be a very interesting name for the Rockets to actually consider, either by outright signing or by trading for. So we'll probably revisit that in the future. But free agency for the Rockets is going to be kind of weird because they want to bring in a veteran point guard. There's a ton of names out there that the Rockets have been continuously linked to. Brook Lopez, Dylan Brooks from the Grizzlies, Fred VanVleet from the Raptors, Cam Johnson with the Brooklyn Nets, Patrick Beverley, who is very open to returning to Houston, I'm told. All these different things, right? So when you look at what the Rockets are expected to potentially do with free agency this offseason, the one thing that I feel pretty confident in saying is that they're not looking to lock down guys for like 3-4 years apiece. They're not looking to, sign a bunch of, role players, supporting cast guys, and, be locked into all these guys for the next 3 or 4 years, because again, they're kind of still in this bridging the gap phase, right? Where Ime Udoka needs a year to probably figure out what he has with all the young talent on the roster. Whoever they draft at number 4, probably Amin Thompson, is going to need to get their feet wet and get adjusted and up to speed at the NBA level. So while the team definitely wants to take a step forward next year, if they don't have a James Harden type to immediately elevate the team to just another level, right? To drag them from the basement of the Western Conference to at least like the play-in range by themselves, which at this point, it just doesn't look like the Rockets are willing to pony up the offer. That's the whole James Harden situation in a nutshell. Is James Harden and his camp thought that they had a slam dunk offer with the Houston Rockets, and the Rockets are not willing to pony up past a certain point. And so now James is, recalibrating and discussing with the Sixers and what, re-upping on a contract with them would look like. And he thought he was going to be able to kind of leverage the Rockets against the Sixers and walk away with whatever he thought the better deal was. And apparently James does want to come back to Houston. He would absolutely come back to Houston, but the money has to be where he thinks it should be. And the Rockets have basically put their foot down and they're not willing to go past a certain threshold. Now, what that threshold specifically is, I'm not 100% sure on the details. I'm assuming it's, again, somewhere like probably not ponying up the 4th year or doing, one less year and like lower average annual value, or maybe it's 2 full-blown years and like they want like a team option or a player option on that 3rd year or a partial guarantee. There's something in there that is a breaking point on why it feels like the reporting has calmed down quite a bit and has shifted all of a sudden to where the general kind of expectation at this point is for James Harden to just stay in Philly. That's kind of what I'm feeling, and that's kind of what I'm expecting to happen at this point. The Rockets, did their discussions and they've done their work. And I have a lot of respect for them that they didn't just bend over and give James a 4-year, $200 million max contract just because they wanted some semblance of relevancy starting next season. So kudos to the Rockets and the brass there for not making that mistake, which was, again, one of the scariest possible outcomes of this offseason, was committing $200 million to an aging James Harden. So with that off the table, you're immediately going to start looking at a guy like Fred VanVleet as a potential veteran guy to add as a point guard. How does that potentially play into, though, drafting a guy like Amen Thompson, right, who needs the ball in his hands to be successful, to run an offense? How do you balance those two guys? I still think it's probably more worthwhile to bring in a smaller name, not committing so much money to a guy like Fred VanVleet. That would probably be the one exception for a guy that you would probably say, like, okay, a 3 or maybe a 4-year deal for Fred VanVleet feels okay because he's 29 right now, or 29 going on 30, I believe. That one feels a little bit different than, bringing in a true, 30-plus-year-old veteran, 32, 33, 34 years old guy, and committing a bunch of money to them over multiple years. But my full expectation is that the contracts that the Rockets are looking to hand out this offseason to guys like Dylan Brooks, Brook Lopez, whatever, are going to be kind of semi-inflated deals that are like 2-year windows, 2 to 3 years max, where maybe you overpay a little bit, but because you're overpaying in a shorter window, you're able to get less years on those deals to then have a little bit of wiggle room where the Rockets could still have some cap space to play with, or some very tradable contracts, some expiring deals to potentially package together and make a, pounce on the next distressed star or whatever further down the line. Because that's what has to happen. I mean, look at the Wizards trade with Bradley Beal. The reason that trade went through the way that it did is in part because Bradley Beal has a no-trade clause in his contract, which is like the dumbest thing ever. The Wizards should have never given him a no-trade clause. The only one still in the NBA, and the Wizards gave it to Bradley Beal. But their goal with that trade, right, was to clean up their books. And that's what they're trying to do now with Chris Paul, is they want clean cap space moving forward. So when you have a distressed asset, a star player that wants out, you either have to be able to give them back a blue chip prospect, future draft capital, or clean up their cap sheet to where the team will then have all that money to play with the following offseason or whatever, or get them out of the luxury tax, all that stuff, or some combination thereof. So if the Rockets are able to get Brook Lopez on a 2-year, $40 million deal, or if they're able to get Dylan Brooks on a, I'm expecting Brooks to get somewhere from like 17 to 20, 21 million a year. I think that's probably roughly his market value, maybe a little bit on the lower end of that spectrum. But like, I wouldn't necessarily be completely opposed to the idea of like 3 years, 60 million for Dylan Brooks, because it becomes a very tradable contract. And even if he's not necessarily your de facto starter, maybe he's like just the gritty, tough guy you bring off the bench. He also then further makes like Jae'Sean Tate a bit more expendable, because then Jae'Sean Tate becomes a guy that you can trade. He's got a very movable contract. Maybe you pick up a future first for him. I think the Rockets just have a lot of options here. And it's going to be really interesting to see what direction they ultimately go in free agency with a bunch of these different names, because they are, and this point has been hammered home multiple times, they want to bring in multiple names, right? They want to bring in, not one main guy, which is why I think the James Harden thing probably capped out at a certain point money-wise, because if you were to give James a full-blown like $50 million starting out contract, or 46 or whatever his starting number would be, then you'd be kind of hamstrung to be able to bring in more help alongside James. So I do think their goal has been, we want to be able to field a roster that is legitimately way more competitive than it's been in previous years. We don't want to just be trotting out a bunch of 19 and 20-year-old kids. And there's going to be at least some stakes next season to where guys are going to have to like earn what they get, rather than just being a blanket, hey, okay, you're going to get these minutes no matter what. You're young, you're a top draft pick, you're going to get 30 plus a night regardless of how bad you're being. No, it's going to be, okay, if you're playing poorly, you might get benched because you're now in year 3 or in year 2 and expectations have shifted, and we've got a veteran on the bench who can actually give us meaningful minutes if you're having a bad game. And so your spot is not safe. And I think that's going to be the expectation for everybody on the roster, which is why the Rockets are looking at adding some veteran help kind of all over the court, right? A lead guard, a certified capable wing player, a legitimate big man. Different options to where maybe Sengun's having a bad night, so you go more Brook Lopez. Maybe Jabari and Tari are struggling, so you go more Dylan Brooks. Maybe KPJ and Jalen are struggling, so you lean more into Fred VanVleet. Or Amon Thompson's just not ready to run the show, whatever. That's kind of the expectation that I have for how the Rockets are planning to pursue free agency this offseason. So with that, that's going to do it for today's episode. As always, thank you so much for checking out the show. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcasts. That's Apple, Spotify, Google, the Odyssey app, free and available on all podcast platforms. We're also available on YouTube. Go to YouTube, search Locked on Rockets. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked on Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.